Delisha Krause coming at you again with another great edition of PragerU Live in Los Angeles at our brand new and hopefully improved PragerU headquarters. We are really excited today to have our newest presenter, Jared Meyer, join us. If you haven't checked out his video, you should definitely go to PragerU.com right now. And I think you're going to like it because it talks a lot about capitalism, specifically how you must love capitalism. And even if they don't know it, liberal hipster millennials probably love capitalism as well. So Jared Meyer, he's Senior Research Fellow at the Foundation for Government Accountability. And we're also going to be asking him about his new mini book that's available on Amazon, How Progressive Cities Fight Innovation. I'm really excited to learn more about that. And don't forget to please click the link to donate as soon as possible. Even $5 makes a difference because we want more millennials to see these interviews and all of our great lineup of amazing presenters over at PragerU.com. So Jared, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hey, looking forward to it.
I really loved your video. I've been a fan of your writings for a while. I know you've contributed at Forbes in the past, and your kind of sphere of influence and expertise tends to be how regulation can hurt innovation. Can you break that down a little bit for our audience?
Well, I think what we see right now is that a lot of people, when they see brand new services, all these services they use on a daily basis, they think they just come about. They don't think about all the work that had to go into developing them. And when you have government regulation at the level that we have today, I mean, over 1 million commandments from Washington, words like must, cannot, shall, that really makes it difficult for entrepreneurs to grow a business, much less start it. So I'm always in favor of getting more things and getting them cheaper, and government regulation can often make that difficult.
So I was talking to a girlfriend of mine who's a millennial entrepreneur. She's a very successful woman-owned and woman-employed business here in downtown LA. And she was talking about how difficult regulations in the state of California make it for her to like walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And she also knows and works with a lot of other female business owners that complain about the same thing. And women, small business owners seem to be the largest growing group of business starters nowadays. So what can women do to continue to start businesses but fight these like overreaching government regulations?
Well, it's interesting because if you look at technology now, it's easier than ever before to start a business. And I mean, it's still very difficult. But I use the example of my mom, for example, speaking of women entrepreneurs. She would make these mittens. I know you in LA might not know what a mitten is, but it's something you wear on your hand when it's cold outside. So she'd make them out of old sweaters from Goodwill and then sell them at craft shows. I mean, maybe she could sell 20, 30 in a good day, but now with Etsy and all these online platforms, she can theoretically reach anyone in the world. So what I see, it's really transformational to allow people to grow their businesses, but also people to work part-time or earn some supplemental income through this type of work. But yet we see startup rates at their lowest rate in over 25 years. So there's some disconnect where it should be easier to start businesses, yet people aren't doing it. And I put the blame mostly on government regulation.
And I mean, what would you say is the most business-friendly startup state?
Ooh, that's tough. It really depends on where you are. I mean, what is crazy is that a lot of startups are still happening in California because of all the benefits. I mean, the weather, first of all the venture capital you have out there, the smart people coming out of these universities, all the immigrants that can work at these different companies. But yet they seem to want to force these startups out. I like using the example of San Francisco practically trying to make Airbnb illegal, even though it was founded there. So I'm wondering how much longer that can go on, because there are plenty of cities and states across the rest of the country ready to take over whatever California is losing.
So I actually tweeted out your video today your video is a perfect example of why I always kind of like smirk and chuckle when some lefty friend or a new acquaintance of mine talks about how they just watched this super cool and educational documentary about how blank conservative or capitalistic principle is wrong. And when I'm like, oh, where'd you watch it? Then they tell me, oh, Amazon Prime or Netflix. And your video points out how even people that might identify as more left-leaning or pro-government regulation really should love capitalism and want limited government.
Well, yeah, I mean, they practice it every day. Every time you're using one of these services that now, I mean, just the example of Uber. If you wanted to get a private ride just even 10 years ago, that was truly a service for the 1%. Like the richest people in America could do that. Now anyone can do it. And
Mhm.
Uber's fastest growth has been in low income or median income communities. And then you look at all the free services today that you can get from a company like Google. And now Netflix, how you have access to a DVD collection that would make the richest American, 15 years ago jealous. It's
Mhm.
all about that capitalism is delivering these new services to people that we couldn't even imagine just a few years ago.
I don't want to jump the gun because I've been telling her she needs to write a piece on this for a very long time. But a mutual friend of ours, Mary Catherine Ham, and I are big fans of Rent the Runway. And she and I were talking once on a road trip last year with our little girls on the way to Disneyland about how now we can all have the closet of Cher from Clueless, where for the girls out there, I don't know how many guys watching have seen it, but Cher goes in and she pairs like what she's going to wear and what's available in her closet on this like high tech screen. And now, I mean, I can rent a $2,000 dress to wear to an event for a couple $100 or a $500 dress for 25 bucks. And before I wouldn't go to Nordstrom or Bloomingdale's and buy a designer, DVF gown. And the innovation and the technology that you talked about has made it possible for middle class and even some lower class people to have access to products that they didn't have before.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And what I like to point out is, I'd count Rent the Runway as part of the sharing economy because it's
Mm-hmm.
about expanding access through online platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And but a lot of people, when they hear the word sharing economy, they only think of Uber and Airbnb. And of course, I've used those two companies as examples already, but it goes far, far beyond that. We talked about Etsy as well, another online platform for handmade goods. And I see it really extending to anyone who's working for themselves. Because back in the 1950s or the 1930s, when we set the majority of our labor law and regulation, you pretty much needed to have a boss, and then they expected you to punch a time card. That is the work model of, my grandfather's workforce.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how work is today. People are going to be working for themselves at increasing rates. And since the early 2000s, all the growth we've seen in work has come from people working as independent contractors. So it's something where, sure, the employment model works for some people, but as technology makes everything cheaper, more convenient, and more accessible, we're going to see on the work side people being able to fulfill those entrepreneurial dreams that they have.
So, in a recent article in Forbes, you talk about how the majority of millennials, or like something like only 18% of millennials, actually trust government regulators. So then, how come you think millennials want the government so involved in every other decision process of their lives?
Well, I think I call it this one is the Uber effect. I think when you have government regulators get between you and something you love like Uber, the effects of government regulation in the forms of higher prices and reduced competition,
Mm-hmm.
it's crystal clear. But when you have government regulating something like the energy sector or the financial sector, by the time you're sending money on Venmo or going on, charging your iPhone, I mean, the effects of what would have been in the Paris Climate Accord are far from clear. It's something where it's right in their face when it comes to new technology. And I think that's what makes millennials of all stripes embrace that part of free markets. They might not embrace capitalism. They view it as a dirty word. But if you ask them if they want a free market or a government controlled economy, millennials of all political stripes are overwhelmingly in favor of free markets. So it might just be a branding problem with capitalism.
So you think that even the phrase free market, some Bernie bros out there might be a fan of?
Oh, definitely. I mean, like, regardless of what Senator Sanders wants to say, no one wants the government telling people how many choices in deodorant they can have. What they want right now, I mean, how many of them took an Uber to a Bernie Sanders rally?
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason that Bernie Sanders, when he was up there, and this is a time I wish I could do a great impression of him, but he didn't start saying about how much he hates Uber. He'd rail against the big banks instead. It took one Bloomberg reporter catching him off guard to get him to say that he's no fan of Uber. You can quote me on that. So
Wow.
it's something where he knows his audience and he knows that young people love these technologies that are giving them the goods and services and work opportunities that they desire.
So let's jump to your new mini book that people can go to Amazon right now and check it out. It's How Progressive Cities Fight Innovation. How long is it? How much is it? It seems like it'll be an easy and entertaining and educational read, but can we delve into some information about what you looked into in that book?
Oh, definitely. And just to show you, it is very, very short. It's 10,000 words. You can read it. If you're traveling anywhere, it's nice and quick. You get to right to the point. I don't like wasting any time. But what I found so odd is that these services, and I use Uber and Airbnb as examples through all the regulatory fights they've gone through,
Mhm.
these services really help people, as we talked about, who are middle income or lower income. And it helps people in cities even more than it does in rural communities. Yet what you're seeing is that cities are the ones fighting back against these services. So I try to make the argument that states need to step in and protect people who live in cities when these local policies threaten innovation. And as we move on to autonomous vehicles, drones, anything like that, we're going to see a lot of cities purely not understanding the benefits that can come to consumers and getting in the way of new technology. So I think it's time for states to step up and rein in these cities and really save progressive cities from themselves.
And you've seen a lot of places like here in Los Angeles, it took Uber and Lyft forever to be able to negotiate a deal with LAX because the taxi unions were fighting it and liberal city council people were fighting it too because they were getting campaign donations from these taxi unions.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I was just in Fort Myers actually this morning, and when I got in there, they still can't pick you up from the airport because Florida is now the 40th state to pass a statewide preemption, the kind of thing that I think is a good idea, where no local governments or airports can ban Uber or Lyft or any of these
Mhm.
ride sharing services. But I couldn't get it hasn't gone into effect. So I couldn't get an Uber from the airport. So it cost $35 before tip to get a taxi. On the way back, the Uber was $21. That's
Wow.
$14 that someone who's trying to live paycheck to paycheck, that's a huge difference. So maybe for some, person living in a city who's pretty well off, they don't care about $14, but for a lot of Americans, that's a big deal. And add that up throughout the economy. And when we're protecting established industries like taxis, we're making things a whole lot worse for consumers who could use all the help they can get.
Or that $14 is a Chipotle with guac and a drink you could have gotten at the
Yes.
airport.
And the crazy thing is, Uber drivers also will earn more than taxi drivers as well. So it's cheaper, and the people who are doing the work are earning more. I mean, it's the closest thing we can have to a win-win that exists. It's just the people who had paid for a special interest privilege before from the government, they're losing out. And you know what? I think they deserve to. So.
So, final question for you. I'm glad you brought up drones a couple of sentences ago because I know that I believe Senator Cotton and Senator Sass and some other people on both sides of the aisle in Capitol Hill are working on deregulating the FAA having control over drone laws in certain states and municipalities and letting that go down to the local level. Do you see any chance of that passing at the federal level and them passing those down to the states?
It'll be tough because the FAA, I would really like to see drone regulation move outside of the FAA because their mandate is safety. And adding a bunch of small vehicles flying in the air, there's no way that increases safety. Something could theoretically go wrong. So that's why they're going to take a very restrictionist view on this. So
Mm-hmm.
why safety should be paramount and we should work on a regulatory structure that will allow us to compete with countries like the United Kingdom that are becoming a worldwide leader in drones, or Australia. What we're seeing right now is that the FAA is ill-equipped to handle this. Think if you're a regulator, if they allow drones and then something goes wrong, they're going to make the front page of the newspaper. But if they cut off an innovation that never ends up happening, a lot of people won't notice. So regulators are by design very cautious, and that's why we need something else in terms of public pressure and politicians then standing up for this type of innovation so that we can force regulators to be accommodating in a way that still protects safety but promotes innovation.
Jared, it was so good to talk to you. I love delving into your expertise of your mind. Thank you for doing this PragerU video. Everyone should definitely check it out and be sure to like and share not only this Facebook Live, but Jared's latest video with PragerU that came out today. And also, if you're a fan of PragerU, please consider donating because our videos are able to be kept free because of generous donations from normal people like you and me. Even $5 makes a difference. And if everyone who went and watched Jared's video today just donated $10, that would ensure that 20 million more people see PragerU videos. Thanks so much for tuning into this edition of Facebook Live. I'm Elisha Krause from the LAHQ signing off.